And then I said, test it out. And literally she stands up out of the thing and she has no pain. She can move her head all the way around. And I got surprised, right? Because I've never prayed for anyone. And yet I started to see people be healed and something happened in the spiritual realm.
Welcome to the Radical Health Rebel podcast. I'm your host, Lee Brandon. This work started for me several decades ago when I started to see the impact I could make on people, helping them to identify the root cause of their health problems that no doctor could figure out, including serious back, knee, shoulder and neck injuries, acne and eczema issues, severe gut health problems, even helping couples get pregnant after several IVF treatments had failed. And it really moves me to be able to help people in this way. And that is why I do what I do and why we have this show. In this episode, we dive deep into a fascinating and often overlooked aspect of healing, the power of prayer in reducing or even eliminating pain. My guest, Beatty Carmichael, brings a unique perspective on this topic, drawing from what he calls spiritual scientific laws. While there is plenty of scientific evidence supporting the role of prayer in healing, Beatty approaches this discussion from a more spiritual standpoint. He shares his insights on how prayer works, why it can be effective, and how aligning with divine principles may play a role in overcoming pain. Now, I'll be honest, we don't necessarily agree on all aspects of how and why prayer works. However, I do believe this is a powerful conversation that challenges conventional thinking and offers a fresh perspective on healing. Whether you're deeply spiritual, scientifically minded, or simply curious, I encourage you to listen with an open mind. Now, let's get into it. Beatty Carmichael, welcome to the Radical Health Rebel podcast. Thanks for coming on the show.
Well, thank you, Lee. I'm excited about being here.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to this conversation. And so, Beatty, you've come from a long line of medical doctors focused on healing, but your journey has taken a unique turn. Can you share with the audience how your family legacy influenced the work that you're doing today?
Yeah, so it is really kind of interesting. So I come from a line of 7 generations, consecutive generations of medical doctors, all focused on bringing healing through the medical science. But my generation and I never went there, but they're still kind of, I'll call it maybe in the spiritual realm of some sort. There must be like a healing mantle that says this is the calling in our line. And I took a different approach. Rather than going to healing in medical science, I started to apply spiritual science, being able to test and empirically measure results. And so now I do what medicine can't do. I call myself a prayer doctor instead of a medical doctor. And using this approach, I've seen things that science says is incurable, like glaucoma disappear and arthritis and a lot of things tied into just chronic pains and things of that sort. Over the years, I've helped over 700 people get completely free of these things pretty much instantly.
So am I right in saying, just to paraphrase what you said, you see yourself as a prayer doctor? Is that right?
Yeah, a prayer doctor, only because I'm not a medical doctor, but I take the same science and strategically apply it to the specific issues. And I've seen that science get rid of those issues typically within 12 minutes or a couple hours or something like that.
So just so that we're all on the same page, so to speak, what would be your definition of what a prayer actually is?
So, yeah, that's a great question. So if you think about there's kind of like 2 realms, if we call it. You have the earthly realm, the physical realm that we're in, and gravity and things of that sort. But then there's a spiritual realm, and I'm not talking about religion. I'm not talking about Muslim or Buddhist or Christian. I'm talking about that there's some God who created everything, and he's a spirit, and there's a part of us that is spiritual. And in that spiritual realm, there are different laws. And the way that we approach the God who created all that is through prayer. That's you and I are talking over the computer. And when we talk to God, we talk through prayer. So it's more of a prayer doctor guiding people in prayer to approach this God the right way so that we can get rid of these things that only He has control over.
Mm. So obviously, you were saying, your ancestry. There's a long line of medical doctors. Why was it that you didn't go down that route, and why was it that you've gone down the spiritual route that you have?
Well, if I would be honest, which I will be honest, um, things changed. Through the 7 generations, doctors were professionals, especially over here in America. And they went into that profession with the express goal of helping others. It wasn't about money. Sometimes someone would give them a chicken, other times someone would give them a lot more money. And so they provided their services to bring healing and charged what was appropriate for the person. And then as my dad came along, he everything started to shift. It went from a profession to turning into a business. This is
Mm,
when health insurance companies started to take a strong hold and started to demand certain pay wages only for the doctors for a procedure. Managed care started to come in and buy up these practices and say, we'll run it. And now this person that has never had a boss has a business boss that's telling them control cost, right?
mm,
Do more. And it just kind of, it took the whole flavor of I'm in it for the profession to help others, and now someone's controlling me. And so my dad kept telling me and my brothers, don't go into medicine. It's
mm,
not the same anymore. So
mm,
that's really one reason. But I have to be honest, one more thing.
mm,
My dad, he was a vascular surgeon. And so he did a lot of life critical emergency things. He would always be called out in the middle of the night for an emergency. And he worked 80 to 100-hour weeks. That was his average work week. So he never had time off. We would go travel and he would always stay back and work. And I said, I don't want that life.
mm,
I want to enjoy life. You can see behind me a lot of travel. I love to
mm,
travel. So I couldn't do it as a doctor. So I said, I'm not going into medicine. I want something else that I can do, make money and have my life.
mm,
And so that's why I never went. But there's always that like this urge to, I want to help people.
mm,
And that's how it all came about.
mm. Yeah, it's interesting. I kind of see the same paradigm that your dad saw. Really, um, I mean, my view is of modern medicine that for emergency medical care,
Hmm.
for trauma care, is fantastic. It's the best thing you can use. Anything else, from what I've seen, is probably one of the worst things you can do. Right?
Yeah.
And my parents are getting older now, and they're having more trips to hospital, and the emergency care is pretty good. I'm not going to say it's excellent. I won't go that far. It's pretty good. But then as soon as you start dealing with chronic issues, they generally just make it worse, is my experience.
Yeah.
You know? So that's one side of things. So that's why you didn't necessarily go down that route. Like a lot of people do, right? If one of their parents is a medical doctor, they often go down a similar route. But what led you, okay, so you're not going down the medical route, but what led you towards the more spiritual route?
I didn't expect to go down that route.
Mm,
So my backstory history is I went into marketing, and I've actually been a marketing consultant and have a small business doing marketing for 30 years. And right now, like for the last 12 years, we work exclusively with real estate agents in the United States to help them generate listings. It's a little company called agentdominator.com. So I had no intention of going into anything like a prayer doctor as I
mm,
proclaim myself. But uh, something unusual happened, right? So God started to work in my heart. Sometimes we feel things in our heart. We recognize that maybe God is doing something. Like let me see if I can, for more of the secular audience to understand, if you've never really thought about this, to understand this connection. A lot of times there's a thing people call karma, right? If you do bad stuff will happen. And we come up with the term karma because we see a direct cause and effect of some sort. I mean, it's not a direct, but we see this general cause and effect. Bad people get bad things that constantly happen. Good people that love others constantly get good things. And so we start to see this stuff. And these are the spiritual laws at play. And we usually know we do bad because we have a conscience and that says, oh, you shouldn't have done that. So there's this spiritual realm. And I started to feel in that spiritual heart of whatever it is to want to go pray for people. This was actually about 8.5 years ago, 8.5 to 9 years ago. And just go pray for people who were sick. And I was a little timid, but I remember I was out at, here in the United States, we have a company, a chain called Walmart. So they're
Hmm.
large department stores. And I went out to Walmart and I remember it was this one weekend and this little old lady was riding one of the electric scooters and she had like an assistant walking with her, almost like a nurse that was helping her get things off the shelf. And I said, are you in pain? She says, yes. I said, well, can I pray for you? She said, yes. And I said, well, what do you mean? What's going on? She said, I have degenerative discs in my back, in my neck, and degenerative discs down in my back. And I can't lift my head up. I can barely turn it. And I've got arthritis and lupus. I mean, she was just racked in pain. So I prayed for her like 10 or 15 seconds. It was almost like, God, I ask that you heal this woman and take all this pain away. And then I said, test it out. And literally, she stands up out of the thing and she has no pain. She can move her head all the way around. And I got surprised, right? Because I've never prayed for anyone. And yet I started to see people be healed and something happened in the spiritual realm. So as the Lord guided me down this process over the years, I started to test and experiment. At that time when this happened, and this was like totally unusual, I wasn't expecting this, but I started to measure about a third of the people that I would pray for were instantly healed. But then I started to test and kind of study spiritual laws. How do these things work? And apply them. And I started to get it up to about 90% of the people. Now, I'm not talking about going to the hospital.
Mm.
Just Walmart, right?
Mm.
People out living life, but they got pain that they're dealing with. And it's primarily pain. And then the Lord started to impress on me to really dissect the process and then document it into a book, which is the book I wrote called The Prayer of Freedom. And what the Prayer of Freedom does is it takes this journey that God just kind of pushed me into and and dissects it down so that you don't have to be special in prayer. All you have to do is know how specifically to pray. And as I've started to test this approach with other people, like I work in an addiction recovery center as a volunteer teacher, and these people in addictions, they're dealing with all kinds of chronic pain and mental illness and addictions and going through a strategic approach to prayer. Basically, it's just saying, God, I'm sorry for doing bad things, right? So back to karma, you do bad things happen, concept. And so when we do bad things and bad things against God, things that he says don't do, then bad things start to happen in our lives and we get these chronic pains and everything else. But when we say, I'm sorry for these things that I've done, God, then these things start to disappear. And what I found, I started to test and track these things at this addiction recovery center and giving these people the step-by-step process. 87% of them saw everything that they were dealing with, struggles in their life, like pain or addictions or mental illness. They saw it all literally disappear in a matter of just days. So that's how I got here. I
Mm.
didn't mean to. I didn't want to write the book. I'm trying to grow my business,
Mm.
and God kept saying, "Write the book," because I saw that you have a book on the back of your shelf, so you know how much time and effort it
Mm.
is to write an excellent book. And but He's kept saying, "Write the book." So that's how I got here.
Mm. Interesting. So I think obviously I'm in the UK, you're in the US. Here in the UK, I would say now I know you've said from the beginning of the interview, it's not this isn't about religion, so to speak.
You know,
And in the UK, I would say the UK is probably a lot less receptive. Like religion isn't a big thing in the UK, whereas I know it's quite a big thing in the US. And I was just thinking, when you were offering to prayer for people in pain, did you sometimes get quite negative reactions to
oh,
your
of course.
offer?
Yeah. Um, what I find is, and I never push it. I always say, "Hey, can I pray for you?" And if they say no, I said, "Okay." It didn't bother me because I hate to say it this way, right? It's not my body in pain.
Mm,
So if they don't want prayer, um, but I would push a little bit at times. Like I remember this one lady, she had a arthritic glove on. When you have arthritis, you have this compression glove because it hurts so much. And I just really felt in my heart compassion for her because I knew that she was in pain, and I knew that I had a really high chance of helping her get free of it. And so I said, "Can I pray for you?" "No, no, no." And she'd walk away. And I kept thinking, it's like almost like God keeps putting this urge, and go pray for her. So I chased her down and said, "Please let me pray for you." And she was really timid. I guess she's been hurt a lot by people in the past. And there's also the racial difference. She's a little old black lady, and I'm this white, bald headed guy. And who are you coming up to me in this, in the public? And so I finally did this. It was kind of a funny thing. I said, "Well, look, watch this." And I said, "Arthritis, leave." And her eyes bugged. I mean, she was like 4 or 5 feet away. I just pointed at her eyes bugged open. And she said, the compression sleeve was on the left hand. She said, "What did you do?" So what happened? "What do you mean?" "The pain's almost gone." I mean, it's like it really caught her by surprise because she had never seen God intervene in her life, but she did then, and it totally changed her. So while we are maybe a little bit more religious in the United States, I wanted to really stress, and this is the key. I'm trying to stress. This isn't about religion.
mm,
It's about spiritual science. And religion says, I'm a Muslim, or I'm a Christian, or I'm a Jew, or I'm a Buddhist, and I have my own philosophy of how the spirit realm works, right? And so now we battle with my philosophy is better than yours. But if you get all the philosophy out of it and say, let's measure this scientifically, because like physical science, right? Physical science says, I'm going to identify physical laws I cannot see by empirical data. Empirical data is I can observe it. So I've got my pen, and empirical data is if I let go of my pen, the pen drops. And it happens every time. And it works whether I drop my pen or you drop your pen. And so now we can measure empirically that there is a physical law that we call gravity, and it works every time. What I started to do, and I think this comes back to my 7 lines of medical doctors, because medical doctors are scientists. They work on the science of the human body and try to figure it out. And so, taking that same background, I started to test different things and measure the result. And I found that it didn't matter. And by the way, now that I've identified a lot of these spiritual laws that create chronic pain and things of that sort, I've been able to teach this same approach to lots of people, and they get the same result. So this isn't about religion. It's about science of the spiritual laws, the spiritual realm. And I build up, you in science, you start to build this foundation of your theories and your understanding, and then you test those with newer things. And as it continues to work, you can confirm. So as it started with like chronic pain, because that's the easiest. You see someone walking on crutches, right? So you go, I bet you're in pain. Let's try this. But then I started to see that the same thing applied to like depression and anxiety or panic attacks. It starts to apply to our eyes, like glaucoma and macular degeneration. Um, it starts to apply all over because the law is the law. And it doesn't matter whether you're religious or whether you're atheist, it still works. You don't have to be religious to let go of my pen.
Mm.
You can be atheist and the same thing happens. So that's why this isn't religion, it's science, but science within the spirit realm as opposed to the physical realm.
Mm. Yeah, it's interesting because I'm just thinking my own upbringing. So I went to a Church of England primary school. So from age 5 to 11, it was a Church of England primary school, and we'd sing hymns first thing in the morning.
Yeah.
When I went to age 12, there was no religious affiliation at all to the school. But just to kind of go over my own story, so I'd be at school and they'd be talking about God, and we'd be singing hymns, and onward Christian soldiers marching off to war, which I was confused about as a 7, 8 year old. And then I go home and my dad's like, God doesn't exist. There's no such thing as God. Don't be stupid. You live, you die. It's black and white. That's it, right? So growing up, I was a bit like, oh, school's telling me one thing, my dad's telling me another thing, and my dad still thinks that way. But I've developed my own belief, if you like. I'm not a religious person, but I believe there is what I call a creative force. Some people call that
Yeah.
God. I think because of my schooling, I just don't fit that name. Just doesn't fit for me. What was your kind of spiritual or religious upbringing? If you're struggling with pain or feeling like you're not reaching your full potential, listen to Stephen's story. Stephen, a banker and aspiring Ironman triathlete, came to see me for help with chronic back pain that was affecting his sports performance. After years of getting fit for ski seasons and triathlons, Stephen was always facing setbacks, injuries that would leave him frustrated and unable to push to the next level. He came across an article in Men's Health about Czech practitioners and decided to give it a try. In just a few visits, I created a customized exercise and nutrition plan for him. Over the next few months, Stephen saw significant improvement. Not only did he have his best ski season ever, but he also completed his first Ironman. But that's not all. Stephen recommended me to a friend dealing with back pain. After working together, his friend not only eradicated the pain, but also achieved his fastest marathon time. My approach is more than just training. I educate my clients on what's right for their body so they can continue to improve without constant need of intervention. If you're ready to take your health and performance to the next level, just like Stephen did, reach out today for a consultation at www.bodycheck.co.uk and let's create a plan that works for you.
So mine was, and you have to understand here in the United States, going to church is a social thing and it's not a religious thing,
Right.
right? So I grew up going to church because that's what everyone does. And then I started to have more of a personal pursuit and religious approach. I am religious.
Mm.
I am Christian, but what I teach is not.
Mm.
Okay. So I want to separate the two.
Yeah.
With my upbringing, I went to a very legalistic church, unfortunately, and they were very dogmatic. This and this, and if you do this, you're going to hell. It's like, well, hold on, I don't think that's quite it. And I eventually left there, but it gave me some grounding, and it gave me a pursuit of recognizing that there is this higher power. People call him higher power. Some call him God. Some call him Father. Some call him Allah. Uh, it doesn't matter the name. Like you can call me Beatty or you can call me Hey You. I'll respond either way because I know you're talking to me. But I started to really try to engage with this God and follow him and learn from him. And I feel that he's been guiding my life a lot. Just like I was sharing, he started moving me into this thing, go pray for people. And I don't want to pray for people. He said, go pray for people. And I kind of had this urge. And then when I started doing it, it started to awaken things. And one of the things that's been interesting is on my walk with God and understanding this process is the more that I have tested these spiritual laws, the more I've been able to, I guess you could say, I hate to say it this way, prove his existence. Okay. Because using or at least prove the existence of something outside of the physical world.
Mm,
There's something out there.
mm,
And in fact, mathematics, science, physical sciences, there's a thing called quantum mechanics or quantum sciences. And they find that, and I forget, it's a disruptive science, but they're actually identifying the spiritual realm through science. They can take an atom and hit an electron, and it causes this atom over here to do something, and that atom is tied to another atom in another
mm,
location,
mm,
and it starts going through the same issues. And there's no physical connection, but there must be something spiritual. So we know we're in the spiritual realm, and pursuing this, I started to get closer to God because I'm going, this is really real.
mm. One of the things that you said was that, you went and studied these spiritual laws. How did you go about the studying process? What was that like?
So there's two things that happen. One is I went back to the ancient religious texts of the Bible, right? Because all the religions of the world, they all have these ancient texts. And I started to realize that the text of the Bible had some of the most accurate description of spiritual laws. Like one of the spiritual laws you see pretty much throughout is confess your sin and you will be healed. Well, confessing is basically saying, God, I'm sorry. So as I started to apply that approach, I saw people being healed. So you can see this cause and effect and see that the laws that the Bible we're talking about seem to apply. So that was the first step.
Mm,
This other thing is the things that I learned on my own. I started to watch videos or read books of other people who seem to be spiritual and knowledgeable in the area of the spiritual laws, and they would give some ideas. Um, I'll tell you one thing that actually I wasn't expecting. I stumbled on this one. Are you familiar with fasting? Where you just don't
mhm.
eat for a period of
Yeah,
time.
yeah.
Okay. So I was doing fasting as just kind of I'll call it a spiritual growth approach. Uh, I would eat Thursday night, and then I'd fast all day through Friday as just kind of the spiritual growth thing. And and I remember I was going out that Saturday. I would usually go out on once I started to see people healed, I felt this obligation, right, in my heart that if I had the ability to restore people from pain, then I don't need to just hold on to it. I need to go use it and
Mm,
help others. So I would go out on Saturday because it was my day off and find people and just ask if I could pray for them. And at that point, I was only seeing about a third of the people I prayed for being healed, which is still a great number, and especially for them, right? If you're the one that's being healed of those degenerative disc or whatever, then you're pretty lucky. But this particular Saturday, I spent that Friday doing this spiritual fast. And at the end of Friday, and the spiritual fast is no food, only water, so no calories. And then as I moved into Saturday, I said, I'm just going to keep fasting. I want to see what happens. And when I went and prayed for people, I literally saw 3 times as many people being healed instantly than originally. And ever since then, I would always stop eating Thursday night, fast Friday and into Saturday before I go out on Saturday and pray. And that's when I saw my numbers skyrocket to about 90% of the people that I prayed for. So would be healed. And so what happened is I started to experiment with these things. And then I started to experiment with what if I don't pray for them, but what if they pray for themselves? And I said, well, and understanding this thing about, confess your sin, saying I'm sorry, and then you're supposed to be healed. What if there's something in my prayer that is bypassing that? And what if because they probably don't have the ability to bypass that. So what if they simply say, I'm sorry? Will they get healed? So I started leading people into a prayer of saying, I'm sorry for whatever things that came to mind that they knew that they probably done wrong with. And then I saw them get healed. And the more I perfected that, the more dramatic the healing, the more dramatic the type of things. Like just, I think it's been about 4 weeks right now. There's a lady at the addiction recovery center where I teach, and she had just come through shoulder surgery. So her name is, hold on one moment. Oh, gosh, I can't bring it up to mind quite so quickly. Her name is Jacqueline Stokely. Okay, and her story is she was been an addict for years, and she's been on the streets a lot. 3 years ago, she had a car accident, went through the windshield, broke her AC and her collarbone. But because she didn't have any insurance, she couldn't go to surgery. So they just put it in a sling. And if you know anything about medicine or how the body heals, if you have a major break like
Mm.
that and you don't set it and you just put it in a sling, it heals wrong.
Yeah.
And she's in constant pain. She could barely move her shoulder. Then she goes to this addiction recovery center. They have health insurance. So they go to a surgeon, an orthopedic, and he said, this is going to be a really terrible surgery because I'm going to have to drill through your bones, break them apart because they were set wrong, and redo the whole thing. So it's highly invasive. He said it's going to be extremely painful. It's going to take a minimum of 12 weeks to heal, and then a lot of physical therapy to get that shoulder working. So I that's where she was. She'd just come out of surgery 4 weeks earlier. You can still see the scar. She's in a sling. And I said, Jacqueline, let me guide you in this little prayer approach. So there's like this 4-step approach that I've learned in prayer to go through this. And she just went through that, basically asking God, bring to my mind anything I need to repent of, right? Any sin I need to say I'm sorry about. And then when it was over, I asked her to move her arm, and she could now move it like this. And she said there was no pain. I said, well, how does it work with your other arm? So then she moves it up, and she has this full range of motion all the way around. She couldn't believe it. All the girls in her class, because they knew what happened with her, they couldn't believe it. She went back for her 6-week checkup 2 weeks later, because this was 4 weeks after the surgery. She's not in the sling. She's got full motion. The doctor, who's been an orthopedic surgeon for 20 years, says, I've never seen anything like this. You should be in pain and you should not be able to move. And he was blown away. But watch this. It was a physical issue. It was a car accident, broken bones. They healed wrong. He broke them all apart violently to re-put her shoulder back together. And all she did is she said, I'm sorry to God. And God restored all of that instantly because God can do anything. He can create miracles. And I'm starting to see this type of stuff as I apply a greater precision, right? I call it science, right? It's a spiritual science. And the more you become precise in the science, the more you can do. Um, used to be we couldn't send a rocket anywhere. Then we can now put a rocket in the sky. Now we can put a rocket to the moon. Now with more advanced science of understanding that, we can try to put a rocket to Mars. So the more you advance in science, the further you can keep pushing those envelopes. And that's what I'm saying. I'm sure I forgot how we got to this part.
Yeah. So the
But
original.
I've got these videos, right? I've got all the videos like Jacqueline sharing her story and showing what's going on. You see the scar. I mean, this isn't like being made up. This is real stuff, but it's like, it's too good to be true, but it's absolutely true.
Mm. Yeah. No, the original question was kind of how did you do the studying? That was how we got onto that.
Thank you for that. Sorry.
Yeah. So when you were talking about the ancient text, what ancient texts were you
So,
referring to?
so I was talking about the ancient text of the Bible. The oldest part of the Bible goes back probably 3,500 years ago. And that's pretty ancient. I mean, The newest part of the Bible is 2,000 years ago. So maybe the Bible goes back somewhere between 35 and 4,500 years ago. And and so there are just a lot of little things throughout the Bible that you can read, and it starts to show this cause and effect. And once you understand the foundational cause and effect, then you can go out and test and see, well, if this is the cause that creates this effect, what if we change the cause? Can we reverse the effect?
Mm.
And and so that's what I was referring to is it's mostly in stories. Sometimes it's more didactic, more like here's exactly what this law is. But a lot of times you have to read through the story and you see these patterns, but you see the same pattern over and over again. And so so I'm going, there must be a spiritual law here because it keeps telling the same pattern.
Mm.
And that's what I was talking about.
Right. Gotcha. Yeah, because so you're referring to the Old Testament, right?
Old Testament and the New Testament. Like
Yeah.
it's the New Testament is the one that said, confess your sins and you will be healed. The Old Testament says, if you sin, you will be sick, right? So you have the Old Testament, if you sin, you'll be sick. And the New Testament says, if you confess your sin, you'll be healed.
Mm.
So it's on both sides of it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. My view on that is how do I say it? What makes a sin? Like what makes a sin to one person isn't a sin to someone else. So is it very specific to the individual person if they think they've sinned, so to speak?
It's not. And i- this is, so a law is a law,
Hmm.
and it's irregardless of the person. Like I'm sure you have in your country, the same as mine, you have speed limit and you have
Hmm.
signs.
Hmm.
So I'm driving down a country road and the speed limit is 60 miles an hour, which is 45 kilometers, 90 kilometers an hour. I forget what it is on the
Yeah.
kilometer. Okay. And then you come into a small town and the speed limit changes from 60 to 45 miles per hour. But that sign, because it's such an old town, a tree grew up in front of it and you can't even see the sign. So you're going 60 miles an hour. The cop pulls you over and gives you a ticket. You said, I didn't know the speed limit changed. He said, it's your fault, right? It's your responsibility to know. It doesn't matter who I am. And I find that the same thing with these things called sin. Sin is not, now I'm speaking just simply scientifically, right? Because
Mm.
I've tracked this. Sin is when we break one of God's laws, whether we really think that we broke it or not.
Right.
Um, and so it's that's why a lot of times, and the way that my process on the prayer of freedom works is you ask God to tell you what things you may have done wrong in different categories so
Mm.
you can kind of figure this out. And then you just write down whatever he's putting in your heart because he's ultimately the judge of whether you sinned or not.
Mm. Interesting. Interesting. I'm just curious. I've
Yeah.
got a question for you. Do you know what language the New Testament was originally written in?
Yeah. So a lot of people say it's Greek, others say it's Aramaic. Aramaic is the actual Hebrew language, or almost like the Hebrew
Yeah.
language of that day. But all of the main Bible translations come from Greek.
Right.
So they've either it was written in Greek because that was the commercial language of the day, or it had been translated into Greek, and that's the one that got propagated out.
Mm. Yeah. I've just I mean many years ago I had a couple of audiobooks and they were talking about that the New Testament was originally written in Aramaic,
Right.
and what both of the books were saying is that because Aramaic, I think, only has something like 19 characters, whereas our alphabet has 26. And the authors of these books were kind of saying that when they would translate it, obviously into Greek and then eventually into English, some of the translations don't necessarily mean what we think they mean,
Absolutely.
which I think is
Yeah.
quite interesting. But it was a long time ago. I remember I listened to those as audiobooks, but it's been a long time since I went through those, probably 10, 15 years ago. But yeah, just
Yes.
that's quite interesting.
Yeah. So the translation, if I'm, let's say, like we talked about, I was in Spain before we started recording.
Mm.
So my daughter lives in Spain, and she knows Spanish and English. I only know English.
Mm,
So if I wanted to communicate to a Spaniard, I would speak the English words to my daughter, and then she would think through and say, how can I say the same message in Spanish? So it's not an exact translation,
mm,
but it's a transliteration so that it tries to apply. And that's what I find with these translations. It's not necessarily exact, but for my purposes of understanding the spiritual laws, it's usually pretty good, pretty accurate.
mm. Yeah, interesting. So, could you tell us a little bit more about your book, the
Yeah.
prayer of freedom, and I think you might have answered this, but maybe go into more detail. What was your motivation to write it, and who ideally is it for? If you've been dealing with chronic pain and feeling frustrated by limited progress, listen to Noriko's story. Noriko, a dedicated tennis player, came to see me after struggling with persistent lower back pain that worsened every time she played tennis. If she played for more than 3 hours, her knee would start hurting and she couldn't continue. We started slowly focusing on active release techniques and exercises from my book, The Tennis Biomechanics Manual. We worked together step by step to improve not just her physical training, but her diet too. By following simple, actionable steps, incorporating both the right exercise and nutrition, Noriko's health and tennis performance transformed. She now plays without back pain and enjoys the game more than ever. Noriko's story is proof that with the right guidance, you can make lasting changes, whether it's improving performance in your sport or eliminating pain. If you're ready to improve your health, performance, and quality of life, reach out today. Together, we can create a personalized plan that works for you. If your injuries are holding you back, visit www.bodycheck.co.uk to schedule your consultation and get back to performing at your best.
Okay. So the book, The Prayer of Freedom, and you can find it if you just add the word book at the end, theprayerfreedombook.com. It'll take you directly to Amazon and other places. And I say that because if you want a copy of the book, if you just type in The Prayer of Freedom, there's so many books written about prayer, freedom, and all these things that you'll just get lost in the jungle. But if you just go to theprayerfreedombook.com, then it'll take you straight where you need to be. Also, the the book is really written for people that fall into three categories because these are the three things I found. And what I've been identifying is all of these issues have spiritual roots. And so the same process, though maybe executed slightly differently, but the same process solves most of all of these problems. And that's relationship conflicts. So you and your spouse or your loved one or your partner or your child or your parent are constantly bickering and you don't know why, but every time you get together, it's just like blows up. Usually a spiritual root there that you can address. And then all of that blow up just kind of calms down and it's peace. Other folks are those, like with your show, chronic pain,
Mm-hmm.
any type of chronic pain, or even sometimes acute pain, like what happened with Jacqueline.
Mm,
That was an acute pain. It wasn't necessarily chronic.
mm,
It had a physical issue, but must have been a spiritual root. Um, Chronic pain would be like friend of mine broke his hip in college football. Now he's early 50s. He's walking with a crutch because he needs hip replacement surgery because the thing's just totally worn out.
mm,
He repents of something from high school and God totally restored his hip. It's like no more hip replacement surgery needed. He's without pain. He just bawled um, and cried. So chronic pain, migraines, mental illness like bipolar 1 and 2, and anxiety and panic attacks and depression, all types of things like that. It works with addictions where you have these urges that you just can't control. Most anything that is a health related issue, this is really effective for. There are other things. So if we go back to the karma idea, if you do bad things will happen to you. So sometimes people feel like their life is constantly being attacked. They keep losing their jobs. Their relationships keep breaking up. It's not necessarily that they have a physical pain or an emotional pain. It's just like these bad things keep happening. I find that often there's a spiritual root there. And so by clearing up the spiritual root, you clear up those things. I actually had that happen in my business. Um, both of our nations were steeped in slavery, if you recall,
Hmm.
back in the 1800s and earlier.
Not sure. I'm not
So
sure that's changed too much, but carry on.
no, they say that slavery is actually more prolific today than it's
Mm,
ever been. It's just kind of hidden a little bit
yeah.
more. But I noticed in my business that every time something good would start to happen, it would just crash down. And I was like on the seesaw and I couldn't understand it. I just thought it was me. I'm just a bad business owner. And then I remember I was needing one more sales rep. And so I hired a sales rep. And actually, over a 2-year period, I hired 30 sales reps and 30 individual sales reps. And within 100% of the time, all 30, the same thing happened. From the time I hired them, said, "You're ready to come on." 2 weeks before they started to 2 weeks after they started, something happened in their personal life, like a death, a divorce, a sickness, a major accident, either with them or a loved one, that they instantly left my employment. So I had to go hire another one. 30 individual sales reps, 100% left within 2 weeks of starting or 2 weeks after because of a personal issue. And I'm now being my scientific mindset, there's something going on here, right? And it was during this time that I had started moving in this process of these spiritual laws. And I won't share how I got to this conclusion, but it turned out to be something with my lineage of being in slavery. So I simply handled that as a spiritual root and everything calmed down. And no longer are we on these high ups and downs and crashes and everything else. So even if you see these patterns in your life, it could be tied to a spiritual root. And that would also be the type of person that may be interested in going through the book. The way the book is set up is the first half of the book is telling you what's going on. And the second half of the book is actually a worksheet and the process to identify these things that might be in your life. And then it has a prayer format that you can just say, okay, God, I repent of these different things. Now heal me. Okay. And so it's very systematic, very black and white. There's no religion to it. You don't have to start going to a church or going to mosque or anything like that. It's simply, you just follow this and it either works or it doesn't.
Mm,
But what I find is almost 90% of the time, it's like all kinds of things disappear out of your life.
mm. Yeah. What's interesting, what your kind of, what your studies have shown is that when someone has, again, I'm not comfortable with the word, but I'm going to use it because it's your language, sinned,
Right.
right? But that's like the
Yeah,
cause of the issue.
that's what the Bible calls when you do something against God. Every religion probably has their own word.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so it's where the person who's in the pain has done, let's call it the bad thing, right?
Right.
What I certainly look at a lot in my own work is when the person has gone through some kind of trauma,
Yes.
right? You could say it was done to them, although that isn't necessarily 100% accurate. But let's say, I don't know, they was abused as a child, or they were in a physically abusive relationship, or whatever it might be. But particularly the first 7 years of life, I tend to see it causing the issues. So in this instance, it's like it's an emotional trauma that's trapped in the body that needs to be released. Whereas what you're talking about is when someone's done a bad thing, let's call it that. But I guess that could have a similar effect in that it's maybe weighing the person down. Would that make sense?
It actually does because that's in my book. So, and I'm glad you bring this up because this is the part that hasn't come out in the dialogue yet. It's not necessarily always a bad thing you do. There have been bad things done to you,
Mm,
but because of how the spiritual realm works, it's like when a bad thing is done to you by someone else, in the spiritual realm, there's a spiritual connection. And that connection allows the bad stuff to flow from them through you. It's hard to kind of describe without getting into more spiritual terms, but just to try to create the concept. And so part of this is you're saying, forgive me, Lord, for God, for these things I've done. But then I also break these spiritual ties with these people that have done bad things to me. And it starts, that's where the resolution is, because it's sometimes, have you ever been around someone that every time you're around them, they're just so down and caustic, critical,
Mhm.
that by the time you're with them for a while, it's like you catch what they have, and you're now depressed and you're critical with everyone. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I know exactly the type of person, but I think I'm pretty good at not taking on their emotions as well.
Right. But sometimes, but you know the pattern I'm saying.
Yeah.
And so what happens is we'll pick up their emotions and their attitudes without even knowing it. That happens in just this physical realm of how we interact with people. Well, if you take that same paradigm, that same concept, and move it into the spiritual realm, something like that also happens. We pick up their same spiritual issues when there's something that they do that's traumatic in our lives, molestation, abuse, rape, whatever it may be. And there's that spiritual connection that we pick up. It's not anything that we did, it was done to us.
Mm,
You can sever that and get free of it.
mm. Yeah, there's a word that springs to mind when we're comparing the two slightly different things. Forgiveness.
Yeah,
You're either forgiving yourself or you're forgiving someone else. Does that make
that's
sense?
absolutely. Forgiveness is, in fact, on that topic, studies have found that people with that a root cause of a lot of chronic pain, I think the study is like 60%, has unforgiveness and bitterness tied into that root. So absolutely, I've seen blind eyes open. I've seen uh, uh, rheumatoid arthritis totally disappear, where the doctor would retest the person. They no longer have rheumatoid arthritis simply because that person forgave someone who hurt them. There's a
Mm,
direct correlation there, and it's a spiritual correlation.
yeah, yeah. In terms of some of these examples that you've mentioned of you healing people with prayer, and obviously coming from a scientific kind of view,
Yep.
have you ever done like follow up, like the lady that was in the wheelchair and with the arthritic wrist, and yeah, she felt better immediately, but do you know what they were like kind of year, 5 years, 10 years, kind of
Yeah.
down the line?
So a lot of the people that I've helped, I haven't been able to follow up because they were just some chance meeting
Mm,
at a Walmart or the gas station.
mm,
But for those that I have been able to follow up, like for example, I mentioned unforgiveness and arthritis. So this lady had rheumatoid arthritis for 15 or 20 years. She'd been diagnosed. She asked if I would help her with it. And I said, well, do you have any unforgiveness for someone? And she says, yes, my sister about 20 years ago. I said, well, are you willing to forgive her? She said, yes. So I just let her, Lord, I forgive my sister. That was about it. Because forgiveness is a choice. It's not like some emotion you have to well up. And then I had her test out her arthritis. I said, God, I'd ask that you just take this arthritis away. She went up and down a flight of stairs and it was almost gone. She was surprised. Well, I was this is over at the Addiction Recovery Center, and I was teaching a 6-week course. So she caught up with me 5 weeks later and said, I want to tell you the rest of the story. She said, I have had no arthritis pain since you prayed with me. I just went back to the doctor just last week. He retested me. He said, I have no arthritis in my body. And he also said, my body shows no sign of ever having had arthritis at all.
mm,
So you have this. And so that was a 4-week period. Another lady, she was in a wheelchair, 73 years old. She had chronic pain in the ball of her foot, of her right foot, and she had been in a wheelchair for 11 years. And I guided her through this same process. The pain left. She's walking around. And that was like 3 years ago, maybe four now. And I literally just followed back up with her about a month or two ago. And she's walking, without a wheelchair right now.
Mm.
So yeah, there's a lot of follow up that I've done. I will say, though, there's some of these things that seem to come back. And it's usually because they did the same thing again, right? So if you start to say, I don't like that person, I have this bitterness against them, and I'm not going to forgive them. Well, you might have that same pain come back, but it's not. It's sort of like taking a bath. Once you take a bath and you're clean, then you're nice and clean. But if you never take a bath again, you're going to get dirty again.
Mm.
And so sometimes these things will return if you follow the same pattern that got them there in the first place.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of the saying that to hate someone else is like drinking poison and expecting them to die.
Yeah.
Right. That kind of reminded me of that. So one of the things I know that you want to do is to be able to make your method of prayer accessible to anyone, regardless of their background. Why is that so important to you? Have you ever struggled with pain that just won't go away, no matter how much you train or rest? Fred came to me with a mix of chronic pain in his wrist, back, and leg from years of running, along with concerns about a skin condition that he wanted to address through diet. He was also worried about the time commitment given his busy work and family life. But after sitting down together and creating a tailored plan, everything started to change. We crafted a diet and workout routine that fit his needs, and I adjusted the program along the way to make sure it was aligned with his schedule and goals. I made sure to be flexible, supporting him in every way, from coaching and teaching to motivating and offering guidance that went well beyond fitness. The result? Well, Fred's pain is gone and his workouts have been completely revamped. He's now incorporating everything he learned with me into his training, and he even returned for ART therapy to fine-tune his recovery. Most importantly, he now considers me part of his overall health support system. If you're ready to experience a holistic approach to improving your health, fitness, and well-being, reach out today for a consultation at www.bodycheck.co.uk and let's create a plan that works for you.
Because I can, right? If you can help someone else, why don't you help them?
Mm.
And I've uncovered a key that is so consistent in its outcome. You do this and the pain leaves. You do this and the anxiety and depression leaves. Not 100% of the time. This isn't a magic pill, right? There's some things that don't have a spiritual root. Like, for example, if I were to trip and break my arm, that's not a spiritual root necessarily. And therefore, if I apply a spiritual process, it may not work. But what I have found is almost 90%. When I tracked this over at the Addiction Recovery Center, as mentioned, 3 classes, and I had everyone fill out these forms, and I tracked their results. And I think the number was 87% saw almost everything disappear, and the other 13%, no change. So this isn't a magic pill, but it is highly effective for the majority of most things that we go through. And if I can share how to be free, then what a great thing to do in life. And it follows back with my whole lineage of helping people get healed.
Yeah.
So I think I'm just kind of walking in something that God or someone has put in my heart to do, and now I've got a way to do it because marketing doesn't do it. Helping agents get listings doesn't get rid of pain, but this does.
Yeah. Yeah. Gotcha. Yeah. From my, I've worked in this field for 29 years, and what I've seen is that some people's pain, illness, whatever you want to call it, has a physical cause. For some people, there's a mental cause. For some people, there's an emotional cause. and for other people, there's a spiritual cause. And the skill, I think, as a therapist, as a practitioner, is to find out what the real root cause of the problem is. And sometimes it can be in more than one of those areas,
Right,
you
right.
know. But I think as you kind of go upwards, so physical is at the bottom, then mental, emotional, spiritual, the higher you go up, I think the more, certainly the quicker the effect.
I never thought about it. You're absolutely right because I've been not to distract you, I've been curious as to why. I mean, when this happens, it's like instantaneous almost all the time. Like a friend got rid of diabetes type 2. That took 2 months. Got rid of sleep apnea. That took just a couple of days. But getting rid of pain and things like that, it's almost like instantaneous. And you finally hit on the thing that I've never thought about. There are these gradients, and the higher you go in those gradients, the quicker it works. And if there's a spiritual root, it can be almost instantaneous. Sorry to interrupt, but
Mm,
that was like an aha.
yeah, I mean, and I think the reason that is because there's different levels of vibration. So again, the higher you go up, the higher the vibration is. So something that's physical, that's solid, like my desk that I'm standing at now, it vibrates at a much lower frequency. So the higher you go up, the faster the frequency is.
Yep. Are you aware of, I don't know much, I've only seen this from afar, people using uh, audible frequencies for healing?
Hmm.
Are you familiar with, okay.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, because as I move that direct, not move it, but as I kind of see it, um, there's a lot, and actually within the spiritual realm of people, it's new age or
Mm,
charismatic or whatever. At the spiritual, there's a lot of focus on frequency,
mm,
and it makes me believe that maybe frequency has some sort of a spiritual connection, or maybe
mm,
it crosses into the spiritual realm. I'm not sure what it is, but
mm.
I'm glad that you brought that up because that makes a lot. That's connecting some dots for me.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of people say that the sound of God is Om,
Hmm.
and I mean, one of my teachers does whole lectures on it. That you can speak for over an hour on that. But yeah, absolutely, sound. I mean, I know someone who went to a sound bath ceremony and came out, and her long term eczema was completely healed.
Yeah, that is cool.
Yeah.
See, there's so much. This is the thing that fascinates me. There's so much in this world, or literally outside of the world, if we talk about the spiritual things, that we simply don't understand. Someone can take
Mm,
a sound bath and come out healed. Someone can listen to, maybe middle C, and it brings healing.
mm,
Someone can go through a book and write down things that God tells them, these are things that I didn't like that you did. So to say I'm sorry, and you get healed. There's so many different paths that you can actually get healed, and yet they all seem to have a similar point.
mm.
Somewhere in that spiritual realm,
Yeah.
there's something there.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. Are you familiar with the seven chakras of the body?
Uh, Not detailed, only from afar. I think that moves into yoga, or
Yeah.
am I?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. It comes
So,
from ancient Indian
right,
philosophy.
right.
Well, each of the seven chakras refers to each of the musical notes.
Yes.
So,
Interesting.
so the root chakra, the first chakra is C, the second
Okay.
chakra is D, the third chakra is E, and so on until the seventh chakra is B. So, yeah, there's definitely something in that for sure. You know.
And this is the thing that I find fascinating, just kind of on this topic of spiritual truths and religions. Um, all religions have elements of spiritual truth. I won't say all religions have a complete accuracy of spiritual
Mm,
truths, and there are probably things that they have that's not accurate, but they all kind of they figure it out and keep to be pointing to these same things, and you see these same patterns regardless of the religion.
mm,
And that's what I think is so cool with it. It's almost like the evidence that the spiritual realm truly exists and these spiritual laws really exist because people have seen it from afar in all these different ancient religions. And and I think that's part of the thing that fascinates with me with the Prayer Freedom book is is you can document it. You can empirically determine these truths are real. Just like that sound bath, you can empirically say, especially if, you know, out of 100 people that go to the sound bath, 90 of them get healed, then you can say that's empirical data that there's something going on
Mm,
that causes it to happen.
mm. Yeah, yeah. Have you ever heard of Anita Morjani?
No, I haven't.
So Anita was born to an Indian family in Hong Kong.
Okay,
So all her friends, half of them were Chinese, half of them were English, but she was from India.
right.
So she grew up not wanting to be who she was, which she later found out much later in life was to have a massive effect on her. And she wrote a book called Dying to Be Me. And in the book, she talks about she got stage 4 cancer and she was in hospital. She was on her deathbed. Most of her family were there. I think it was her brother that was flying to be with her in her final hours. And she had a near death experience. So she left her body. She could see the medical staff working on the body. And she saw the bright white light.
Yeah.
And I can't remember the exact detail, but it was something like, look, your work isn't done yet on Earth. You're going back, right? And and again, I've listened to lots of people talk about their near death experiences, and they always feel really blissful. It's like, do I really have to go back into my body?
Right.
But anyway, so she went back into her body. She came around, and then her brother turned up, and she said, "Oh, I'm so glad you made it. I know your flight was cancelled, but I know you." And he's like, "What? How
How
do
did
you
you
know
know?
my flight was cancelled? You've been in a coma for however many days, right?" And she was like, "Oh yeah, well, when the doctor was working on me, giving me, CPR, and mum and dad were around me, and I know you was at the airport, and she's explaining everything that happened when and she was telling the doctors what they did, and the doctors were like, How do you know this?" Well, the day after she came around, she felt 100% fine, ready to go home, kind of thing. And they ran tests, and they could not find any cancer in her body,
Wow.
right? And the doctors kind of said, "Well, we need to give you chemo just in case you might have it, just in case we've missed it," right? How do you explain that?
I would call it's a miracle. And a miracle is when the God of the universe in the spiritual realm intervenes into the earthly realm and does what is impossible for the earthly realm. That's a miracle, right?
Mm,
And that's what we're seeing. Your the Om bath, the Om
mm,
bath, audio bath. That's
sound
a
that.
miracle, right? Sound bath. Thank you.
Yeah.
Um, that's what I see with the prayer freedom, miracles all the time, because it's not. I mean, it's like that Jacqueline with that shoulder surgery. That's a miracle for it to be completely healed instantly, because there's nothing physically that could ever have done that. But I've learned that if you follow the spiritual laws that God put in place, and God follows what He says He will do when you follow those laws, then a lot of times when He intervenes in our lives, you can describe it as nothing but miraculous. And it happens regardless of the religion.
Mm,
It happens even if you're atheist. It's simply, if you do this law, you get this result. Some people might say, imagine someone from outer space that's never lived on Earth, never lived in a thing of gravity. They would let go of a pin and it would just kind of float there. And now imagine that they come to Earth and say, watch this, you let go of the pin and it drops. They'll go, that's a miracle.
mm,
No, it's just a law.
mm.
And but that's cool. Yeah,
Yeah.
I've heard not lots of stories about that, and that's the only way to describe it. It's a miracle.
Mm. Yeah, it's interesting. I've seen in clients I've worked with over the years what I would call a miracle. But I look at a miracle as something amazingly positive that's happened that I don't fully understand how it happened.
That's a great
Right?
definition. So thank you for that because it's my opinion,
Mm,
right? That my opinion is God intervenes. That's my framework.
yeah,
But really, it's what you said. I just don't understand it.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, the other thing is as well is that there's many things in this world that we know to be true, but you can't prove it. It can't be
Yeah,
weighed or measured,
yeah.
right? The most obvious one is, you can't weigh or measure love. Does that mean it doesn't exist?
No, it doesn't. You're
Right?
right. You can't weigh or measure it.
Yeah. And some people call God unconditional love,
Yep.
right? So you can't prove either of those, really. Can't prove it, not scientifically, but that still doesn't mean they don't exist. It just means science doesn't have the tools to measure it necessarily, one,
Yes.
one way or the other.
I'm 100% agreement on that. That's really keen insight.
Mm. So, what would you say to someone if they were a bit hesitant, following your advice in terms of prayer to overcome pain and illness?
Um, I have to be kind of hard nosed on this one.
Mm.
Soft, compassionate, but hard nosed.
Hmm.
If you're in pain and you want out and you're hesitant to do this, why? All it is, if it's wrong, it won't work. If you don't believe in God, then do it. Even say, God, I don't believe you exist. I don't believe any of this, but I'll give it a try just in case because there's no consequence. I mean, even if you buy the book, any place you buy it online, you can return it in 30 days and get your money back. So it won't even cost you any money to try it. And the way I look at it is this: if you have just I'll give you a perfect example. A friend of ours was dying of cancer. Um, her husband was a religious person and had his own ideas of what this God does and doesn't do. And I said, "Can I come over and pray for her?" He says, "No." Now think about this. If it was my wife dying, even if I didn't believe that that guy's prayer could bring a shift, how much do I want my wife to live? Am I willing to say, yes, you can pray because I'm willing to try anything that doesn't violate what I think is right. If it's I don't have to agree with it. I don't have to believe it. But if it's not like going killing someone, then yes, I'll try anything because the consequence of her dying is so big. So if someone is in pain and you want freedom from it, the consequence of you rejecting this that might work is you continue to live in pain and you become more and more desperate. But all it takes is trying it. And if I'm not right, if this is a lie, it's cost you nothing. You can send the book back. It won't hurt you to say, God, I'm going to say I'm sorry for these things that you say I probably shouldn't have done. And if it doesn't work, then it's cost you nothing. But if it did work, what would your life of freedom without pain be worth? That's that's what's in the way in the scales. What is it worth to be free? Are you willing to do something that takes very little time, very little money, and absolutely no risk? It's a lot easier than going to the doctor, going to a therapist for month after month, going to the chiropractor, spending hundreds or thousands of dollars or pounds every year just to do this really quickly and see if it
Mm,
works. I mean,
mm,
so for me, I can't fathom why someone would not do it. I
mm.
don't know, but that's what I would respond.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because, what I find is most people want a quick fix,
Right.
right? So why wouldn't you at least try that, right? I mean,
Yeah.
listen,
There's no consequence.
yeah, I mean, most people that come and work with me, they normally need to commit to a 6-month commitment, right?
Right.
And to be fair, most people do. And and they generally get very good results. But to look at it from a physical and mental, emotional and spiritual level does take time, right? Now, I do something called the emotion code as well, and sometimes that can work very quickly, but sometimes it takes a long time because there's lots of layers of emotions that need to come out. So, knowing from my own experience that a lot of people often like a quick fix, I can't see why they wouldn't try something that works so quick.
Yeah. From the comfort of your home.
Mm,
And, if you take the reading of the storybook out of it, which takes me about 3 hours to read it, the rest of it's about a 2-hour process,
mm,
maybe 3 when you do it all.
mm,
So you're looking at, and most of the results comes within, from that, what I've been tracking, most of those results will actually come in just the first hour.
mm,
So I can't imagine why anyone would not do it either.
mm. Yeah, yeah. And where can people find you online? And just remind us where people can get your book.
Yeah, so get the book. The book is called The Prayer of Freedom. Just add a word book at the end, theprayerofreedombook.com. Um, I'm online. You can see I do a lot of teaching and stuff, both marketing and religious wise. This is non-religious, but the other stuff is. On YouTube, you can just type in my name, Beatty Carmichael. I'm not really on social media. Keep in mind, I'm a business owner. I just
Mm,
happen to stumble on this, get
mm,
passionate, and I do this, but really I have another life and it's just not a social media life.
yeah, yeah. Well, I would say it's a good thing if you're not on social media.
Yeah.
If I
Yeah.
could
Now,
say,
if you're a real estate agent in the United States, you can find me at agentdominator.com. Okay. But that's about the only other place you can find.
mm, excellent, excellent. Beatty, thank you so much. It's been really interesting talking to you, and it's been really good to kind of get your background and where this information came from, and hopefully this episode is going to at least help one person.
Yes. Hopefully so.
Excellent.
Well, I appreciate it. I'd like to compliment you publicly. I've been on a lot of interviews. You have been the most adroit at really doing a thorough interview, asking great questions, and really bringing out for the audience the real impact of what me as a guest can deliver to them. So I just want to thank you because you put a lot of thought in these questions. You're very astute in understanding the process, and I really appreciate it, and I congratulate you on that. Thank
No,
you.
thank you for saying that. That's great. So that's all from Beatty and me for this week. But don't forget to join me same time, same place next week on the Radical Health Rebel podcast. Thanks for tuning in. Remember to give the show a rating and a review, and I'll see you next time.